My name is Emily Walker. I'm 73 years old, and I live in a quiet little house just outside of Columbus, Ohio. I spend most of my days tending my garden baking pies for the church down the street and watching my grandchildren grow up kinder and stronger than I ever thought possible. But there's something I've never told anyone. Something I buried so deep I thought maybe it would disappear if I just kept moving forward. It didn't. It sat in the shadows heavy on my chest until I realized silence had become its own kind of prison. This story has never been easy for me to even think about, let alone speak aloud. For nearly 60 years, I told myself it was better left unsaid. But now, at this age, with time moving faster and the nights growing quieter, I feel something shifting inside me. Maybe it's the fear of leaving this world with the truth still locked away. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the hope that someone out there needs to hear it. You see, the woman you hear speaking now, grandmother, neighbor, baker, storyteller, was once a girl. No one believed. A girl trapped in a house that should have been her haven, but instead became the setting of her worst nightmares. And for decades, I lived as if that girl had died. But she didn't. She fought to survive. She found a way out. And she built something beautiful out of the ashes. I'm not sharing this because I need pity. I'm not even sharing it because I want justice. I'm sharing it because I know there are others out there. Girls, women, maybe even someone listening right now who are living through something that feels impossible. And I want you to know impossible doesn't mean unescapable. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to take you back. Back to the beginning. To a little town you've probably never heard of. To a house with yellow siding and a crooked porch swing. That's where it all started. And that's where I stopped being a child. When I was little, I thought my house was the safest place in the world. It had white curtains that smelled like lavender and a front porch that creaked when the wind picked up. My mother made cornbread every Sunday, and my brother Jack taught me how to skip rocks across the creek. For a long time, I believed we were just a regular family in a regular town. But the truth is, I just didn't know what danger looked like yet. I didn't know that evil didn't always come wearing a stranger's face. Sometimes it looked like your own blood, sitting at the same dinner table, smiling over mashed potatoes. My father, David Walker, was the kind of man people called a provider. He worked at the steel plant, wore the same boots for 20 years, and believed a man's word was law, especially his. He never raised his voice to neighbors, but at home his silence could split you in half. If something didn't go the way he liked, the air in the room turned tight, like you couldn't breathe unless he gave you permission. He believed men were meant to rule, and women were meant to serve. Not in the poetic, biblical kind of way either. More like women don't speak unless spoken to, and if you cry, you better do it in the dark. He had two kinds of moods: quiet where you didn't exist, and angry where you wished you didn't. My mother, Ellen, was what people called meek. She had hands like leather from scrubbing other people's laundry and eyes that never quite looked you in the face. She tried to protect me, I think, in her own way, but there was never any winning in that house, only surviving. And sometimes just surviving felt like betrayal. Jack was 5 years older than I, tall, lean, with sandy brown hair and green eyes that skipped a generation. People in town used to say he was handsome, that he'd go places. Teachers loved him. Neighbors adored him. He helped carry groceries, mowed lawns, said yes, ma'am, and no, sir. And maybe he was that boy once. But the Jack I grew up with didn't stay that way. At first we were close. He helped me build tree houses and sneak cookies before dinner. We'd lie on the roof, counting stars, whispering dreams into the night sky. I thought he was my best friend. I thought I was safe with him. But everything changed the year I turned 8. It was subtle at first. He stopped letting me sit with him at church. told me to stay out of his room even though it used to be ours. He looked at me differently, not like a sister, but like something he didn't want others to see. Then came the words, sharp, possessive. Don't talk to that boy. You're not going out dressed like that. You're mine. I didn't understand what he meant. I wore overalls and ponytails. I didn't even know what mine was supposed to mean. But it scared me. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Like he believed it. I went to my mother, told her something felt wrong. She was standing at the sink, hands deep in soapy water. She didn't even turn around, just said, Jack loves you. He's just protective. That's what big brothers do. But it didn't feel like love. It felt like chains, invisible ones that wrapped around me tighter each day. I stopped talking at school, stopped laughing. I learned how to walk without making noise, learned how to disappear into corners. One night I woke up and he was just sitting there on my bed, not saying anything, just watching me sleep. I asked him why, and he said he had a nightmare. I told my mum the next day. She said he probably missed being close like when you were little. You should be kind. He's going through changes. What about me? I was going through changes too. But nobody asked me how I was feeling. Nobody noticed that I had started locking my door at night, or that I'd begun flinching every time Jack walked by. My father was no help. To him, Jack could do no wrong. He was the boy who fixed the lawnmower, who knew how to throw a perfect curveball, who said thank you after every meal. If I said anything against him, I was met with a look so cold it burned. He once told me I should be grateful to have a brother like Jack. Not every girl was that lucky. I remember one day in particular. I was about 9. We were having a barbecue. Family was over uncles drinking beer on the porch, cousins running through the sprinklers. I was wearing a yellow dress my mother made. Someone said I looked pretty. I smiled shy, but happy. And then I saw Jack's face. He crushed his soda can in his hand so hard that it split open, pulled me behind the shed and hissed, "You think you're cute. Don't you dare flirt with anyone else. You're mine." That word again. Mine. Like I was a thing, a possession. And I realized then that whatever this was, it was not just in my head. It was real, and it was growing darker by the day. From that moment on, I stopped being a child. My world wasn't made of hopscotch and bedtime stories anymore. It was made of glances over my shoulder, of trying to breathe without drawing attention. My house became a battlefield. But the weapons weren't fists or knives. They were silence, denial, and fear. And worst of all, no one outside those walls ever suspected a thing. Because on the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Smiles for the camera, handshakes at church. But inside, I was already beginning to disappear. I was slipping away one scared breath at a time. It started with the way Jack hugged me. At first it felt normal, brotherly even. But then he began holding on a little too long. His arms would tighten, and I'd feel him breathe deeply against my neck, like he was memorizing something he wasn't supposed to. I didn't know what that feeling was. I only knew it made my stomach twist in ways I didn't have words for yet. He stopped knocking before coming into my room. Sometimes he'd open the door in the middle of the night, claiming he needed something. A book, a flashlight, his sweatshirt. But he never took anything. He'd stand there for a moment too long, staring like he was trying to read my thoughts. I'd pretend to be asleep still as a statue, praying he'd close the door and leave. His eyes changed too. They stopped being playful and started looking through me. Possessive, heavy, like I wasn't his sister anymore, but something else. Something he wanted to keep hidden from the rest of the world. He'd smile when we were alone, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was a warning. There were times he'd brush my hair behind my ear in a way that made me flinch. He'd touch my shoulder while we sat at the dinner table, but his hand would linger too long. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just being sensitive. But even at 10, my body already knew the difference between safe and unsafe, and I was starting to feel unsafe. He would sit next to me on the couch when no one else was home, leaving no space between us. I'd inch away. He'd follow. Sometimes he'd press his knee against mine and say nothing, just stare at the TV like everything was normal. But I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud and steady like an alarm. One day he found me in the backyard, reading under the old oak tree. I didn't hear him coming. He knelt beside me and rested his hand on my ankle. I froze. He asked what I was reading, but I don't remember what I said. All I could think about was how his hand felt hot and wrong. When he finally left, I couldn't finish the chapter. I went inside and locked my door, even though it was still daylight. I wanted to tell someone, but how do you explain a fear that hasn't fully formed? How do you say something is wrong when nothing has technically happened? It felt like trying to hold smoke in your hands. The more I tried to understand it, the more it slipped through my fingers. But the fear stayed. It lived in my chest. Quiet. Constant. I began avoiding him. I stopped sitting next to him at dinner. I waited until he left the room before brushing my teeth. I told my mum I wanted to start sleeping with the door closed. She said I was just getting older, becoming a lady. I nodded. I didn't tell her that I started stacking books behind the door at night just in case. There was no screaming, no bruises, nothing that anyone else would have seen. But something inside me had shifted, and even if I couldn't name it yet, I knew enough to be afraid. I remember the day I finally said something. I was sitting at the kitchen table swinging my feet because they still didn't reach the floor. My mum was peeling potatoes her back to me, humming softly like she always did when she didn't want to think too hard. I told her I didn't like the way Jack looked at me. He came into my room when I was sleeping, that he touched my hair and stared too long. She didn't turn around. Her hands didn't stop moving. The peeler scraped against the skin of the potato with perfect rhythm, as if I hadn't said anything at all. I said it again, louder this time. I told her it made me uncomfortable, that it scared me. She finally stopped, just for a second. Then she let out a breath and said I was imagining things. She told me Jack loved me. I was reading too many stories. Maybe I had a little crush on him and didn't understand it. Her voice was soft but firm in a way that told me the conversation was over. And just like that, the door shut. I didn't cry in front of her. I waited until I was back in my room under my blanket. And then I let it all out. Not just the fear, but the shame. I started to wonder if it was my fault. Maybe I really was too sensitive. Maybe I was the one making it all weird. That's what happens when you're a child and no one believes you. You stop trusting your own instincts. But deep down, I knew she knew. She had to. She had seen the way he hovered. She had walked into the room once and found him sitting on the edge of my bed. I remember the way her mouth opened then closed. She looked away and told him to get ready for dinner. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just ignoring it. She was afraid too. My mother lived in fear of my father. That much I understood, even if it was never spoken. She had no power in that house, and Jack was an extension of the man she couldn't stand up to. So instead of helping me, she folded in on herself. She chose silence because silence kept things from exploding. But silence didn't protect me. It trapped me. I stopped going to her after that. I stopped going to anyone. Teachers asked why I was so quiet now. Why did I never raise my hand anymore? I just smiled and said I was tired. I got really good at smiling. The worst part wasn't what Jack did. It was the way everyone around me pretended nothing was happening. That was the real betrayal. Being hurt by someone is one thing, but being told that your pain doesn't matter, that it's easier for everyone, if you just stay quiet, that changes you. That teaches you your voice has no weight. From that moment on, I kept everything to myself. I learned to hide in plain sight. I became the girl who never caused trouble. The girl who cleaned her plate, folded her clothes, and did exactly what was expected. Because I understood now. In our house, being believed was a privilege, and I had lost it. I was 14 when I first knew something was wrong. It started with the nausea creeping into my mornings and curling in my stomach like a secret I couldn't get rid of. At first, I thought it was just nerves or maybe something I ate. But then the dizziness came, the fatigue, the way my chest ached in this dull, unfamiliar way. I stopped getting my period, and that's when the panic set in. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it was just stress. Girls my age could skip months, right? That's what I read in a magazine at the library. But my body kept changing, and it felt like I was living in someone else's skin. I would stare at myself in the mirror, pushing down on my stomach, willing it to be flat again. My clothes fit differently. My face looked older. The curve of my belly wasn't something I could suck in or hide behind sweaters anymore. It was becoming real and terrifying. I remember the first time I truly accepted it. I was brushing my hair before school, and I caught sight of my side profile. I froze. My breath got stuck somewhere between my ribs. There it was, the swell. It was small, but it was there, and no matter how hard I blinked or turned, it didn't go away. The fear didn't come in one wave. It built slowly, steadily, like water rising in a locked room. I started avoiding people. I wore baggy clothes even in the heat. I'd sit hunched over, trying to look smaller. At night, I'd lie awake with my hands over my stomach, whispering for it to stop, to undo itself, to let me wake up and be normal again. I didn't understand how it happened, not completely. I knew what Jack had done, but I didn't connect it to this. I wasn't taught about pregnancy. No one told me a body could turn against you like this, that it could carry proof of pain inside and show it to the world whether you were ready or not. I skipped meals to try and slow it down. I avoided changing in front of anyone. I tried tying a belt under my clothes to flatten my stomach. Nothing worked. The bump kept growing. My shame grew with it. No one said anything for a while. My mum looked at me longer than usual some mornings, her mouth slightly open like she wanted to speak, but couldn't. My father didn't look at me at all, and Jack smirked, like he knew something no one else dared to acknowledge. That smile made me feel more exposed than anything. I lived every day with the weight of a secret I didn't choose. Every glance felt like judgment. Every silence felt like confirmation. I wasn't a child anymore, but I wasn't a mother either. I was stuck somewhere in between, in a body I didn't trust, with a future I couldn't imagine. And I was completely, hopelessly alone. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I had just come home from school, drenched in sweat, and trying to breathe through the nausea that never let up anymore. My mum was folding laundry in the living room when I bent down to pick something up, and the hem of my shirt lifted. Her eyes locked on my belly. She didn't say a word. She dropped the towel she was holding and walked straight into the kitchen. That night, everything came crashing down. My father stormed into my room, his face red, his eyes wild. He didn't ask me what happened. He didn't give me a chance to speak. He just shouted, "Who did this to you over and over?" I couldn't answer at first. I was frozen. Until finally I whispered Jack's name. The silence that followed was louder than the yelling. He stared at me like I had spit in his face. Then he turned, walked out, and called Jack into the room. I sat there holding my breath, listening as Jack lied with ease. Said I must have been sneaking around. Said he'd never touch me like that. Said maybe I was confused. And my father believed him. He looked at me like I was filth, a liar, a disgrace. He said I had ruined our family. Said no one would want a girl like me. Then he hit me. Open palm across the face. My head snapped to the side. My lip bled. My heart shattered. I begged my mother with my eyes, but she stood in the corner, trembling. She didn't move. She didn't speak. And in that moment, I knew I was on my own. She wouldn't protect me. Not from him. Not from Jack. Not from anything. They locked me in my room that night. Said I couldn't be trusted. That I had embarrassed them. My father said if I told anyone, he'd make sure I regretted it. I believed him. I had no reason not to. The people who were supposed to keep me safe had turned their backs. I lay in bed, cradling my swollen belly, trying not to sob too loudly. Even my tears felt dangerous. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and vanish. But I couldn't. I was still there, trapped in that house, trapped in a body that told a truth no one wanted to hear. What broke me wasn't the slap. It wasn't even the threats. It was the betrayal. My father didn't hesitate. He chose Jack. Just like my mother had chosen silence. Just like everyone always did. That was the night I stopped hoping anyone would save me. I stopped dreaming of rescue. I stopped praying for someone to believe me. Because when your own family decides you're the problem, you learn how to survive without trust. You learn how to disappear even while you're still standing in the middle of the room. I gave birth on a cold night in January. There was no hospital bed, no doctor, just an old mattress in the back room, the one with the broken window and peeling wallpaper. My mother stood by the door, her hands shaking more than mine. No one held my hand. No one whispered that I was strong or that it would be okay. I was 14 and I was alone. The pain came in waves that made me forget how to breathe. My back arched with each contraction. I bit down on a rag to keep from screaming. The room felt like it was folding in on itself. My body tore open and all I could think was that something inside me was dying while something else was trying to live. Then it happened. A wet cry pierced the silence high and sharp. My mother caught him. She didn't speak. She just wrapped him in an old towel and handed him to me. He was so small. Red, wrinkled eyes closed tight. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to feel anything. But when she laid him on my chest, everything inside me broke. He moved barely and let out a soft noise. My arms on their own wrapped around him. I looked at his face and saw nothing of Jack in that moment. I saw a baby, helpless, innocent, alive. And I felt something I never expected to feel. Love. Pure and terrifying. It wasn't the kind of love people write songs about. It was something deeper, fierce, animal. He had come from pain, but he wasn't pain. He was a person, a new beginning. And I knew right then that no matter how he got here, I would protect him with every breath I had left. I cried then, not from pain but from everything else, from the years stolen from me, from the truth buried so deep it hurt to breathe, from the shame, the anger, the grief, but also from the wonder. Because against all odds, in the darkest moment of my life, something beautiful had been born. His name was Charles. I named him myself. My father didn't speak to me for days after that. My mother barely met my eyes. But I didn't care. I had Charles. And somehow loving him didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like survival. No one celebrated. No one brought flowers. But I had him. And he had me. And in that silence, something sacred was stitched into the space between us, something no one could take away. The first night Charles slept in my arms, I made a silent vow. No one would ever know the truth about him. Not the neighbors, not the teachers, not the women at church who stared a little too long, and especially not Charles himself. I would take that secret to my grave before I let it stain the way he saw himself. It wasn't just shame I was protecting him from, it was the weight of it, the shadow that could follow him into every room, into every relationship, into the quietest parts of his soul. He didn't deserve that. He didn't ask to be born from something so dark. I would not let him carry my pain, so I said nothing. When people asked who the father was, I looked at the ground and let them think whatever they wanted. Some called me reckless, some called me a whore. I let them, because every insult they hurled at me was a wall I built around Charles. Every cruel whisper in the grocery store was another brick keeping the truth away from his future. I endured it all. The judgment, the isolation. The way people pulled their children away from me was like I was a disease. I lived as a ghost in my own town, but I did it with my head high. Because when I looked at my son, I saw someone worth disappearing for. I never let Jack near him. Not once. Not even when my father barked at me to stop being difficult. I kept Charles close, even if that meant sleeping on the floor beside his crib some nights, just to feel like I was doing something right. He was the only thing in my life that felt pure, and I guarded him like a secret too sacred to speak. He asked about his father when he was little, just once. I told him he was gone, that some men weren't ready to be fathers, but that didn't make them any less loved. He nodded, then went back to his cereal. He never asked again, and I never offered more. Every time I looked at him, I felt two things at once: pain and pride, memory and miracle. And I accepted that those feelings would live inside me forever quietly at war, but never strong enough to touch him. That was my promise, my burden, my purpose. I would give him a life built on love, even if mine was built on silence. And if one day he grew up to be kind, to be strong, to be free, then all of it, the hiding, the suffering, the lies, would be worth it. Because that's what love is sometimes. Not loud, not pretty, just enduring, unseen, and absolute. Charles was barely 4 when Jack started paying attention to him in a way that felt all wrong. At first it was small things. He'd ruffle his hair too long, stare at him with this twisted mix of pride and possession. He called him little man, but not in the playful way uncles do. It felt loaded, like he was planting a flag in something that didn't belong to him. One afternoon I found them in the backyard. Jack had taken Charles out without asking. He was teaching him how to hold a baseball bat, talking about power and strength. His voice was calm, but his eyes weren't. They were hungry, focused. He said Charles had his blood, that it was time to start shaping him into a real man. My stomach turned. I pulled Charles away. Jack didn't like that. He laughed, but it wasn't real. He said I was too soft. Those boys needed toughness, not coddling. That Charles was his too, whether I liked it or not. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I saw the same look in his eyes that he used to give me. That night, I sat by Charles's bed long after he'd fallen asleep. I watched his chest rise and fall and felt this cold fear settle deep in my bones. Jack wasn't just watching anymore. He had a plan. He saw Charles as an extension of himself, a second chance to mold someone in his image, and I knew exactly what that image looked like. Jack started showing up more, bringing Charles toys, sneaking him candy, and promising to take him places. He told my parents he wanted to help out more, be a good influence. And they believed him. They always believed him. But I saw the truth. I saw it in every forced smile, every too tight hug. I couldn't sleep. I started locking the door again, keeping Charles close. I felt like I was back in that old nightmare, except this time someone else was in danger. Someone I had sworn to protect. Jack wasn't just my nightmare anymore. He was becoming Charles's. I tried to talk to my mother. She looked at me with tired eyes and said nothing was happening. I needed to let go of the past. But this wasn't the past. It was right here, growing louder every day. I could feel it breathing down my neck. That was when I knew I couldn't stay. Not for one more day. Not with him circling us like a wolf pretending to be a shepherd. Jack didn't want to hurt me anymore. He wanted to own my son, shape him, break him, and I would die before I let that happen. It wasn't a decision made in one moment. It was a slow boil of fear, rage, and love. But when it reached the surface, it was clear. I had to run, not for myself, for Charles, because he deserved more than to be a shadow of the man who destroyed me. He deserved a life untouched by Jack's sickness, and I would do whatever it took to give it to him. I left on a Thursday, the kind of night where even the wind felt like it was holding its breath. I had packed a small bag 2 days earlier, hiding it in the crawl space under my bed. Just a change of clothes, some money I'd stashed from cleaning houses, and a folded map from the gas station. I had no real plan, just one rule. Don't look back. Charles was already asleep when I scooped him up. He stirred a little, but didn't wake. I wrapped him in a blanket and pressed my lips to his forehead. I whispered that we were going somewhere safe, somewhere new. My hands shook, but my feet were steady. I had waited years for this moment. I crept past my parents' room, holding my breath with every step. The floorboards betrayed me twice, letting out soft creaks that sounded like thunder. But no one stirred, not even Jack. The front door opened with a groan that made my heart stop, but I didn't pause. I stepped into the night and pulled it shut behind me. We walked for almost a mile before I saw the headlights. My legs were burning. My arms ached from carrying Charles. I started to doubt everything. What if no one helped us? What if Jack found us? But then the car pulled over. A silver Buick with county plates. And behind the wheel was Judge Margaret Daniels. She was a stern woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for making men nervous. I had cleaned her house once a week for almost 2 years. We never spoke much. But that night she rolled down her window and asked if I was finally ready. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. She opened the door and said, "Get in." She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She just drove. Fast. Focused. Her hands were tight on the wheel. I sat in the back with Charles cradled in my lap, watching the streetlights blur past like stars falling from the sky. For the first time in years, I let myself believe we might make it. She took us to a safe house 2 towns over, a place with thick curtains, a stocked pantry, and no men. She handed me a new set of clothes and told me not to use my real name. Then she looked me straight in the eye and said I wasn't alone anymore. Whatever came next, I'd face it with people who believed me. I cried in that kitchen, not because I was scared, not because I was sad, but because for the first time, someone had opened a door instead of closing it. Someone had chosen me. And that kind of kindness felt almost unbearable. That night, I tucked Charles into a new bed in a room that didn't smell like fear. I watched him breathe and knew we had done it. We were free, not safe yet, not fully healed, but free. And that was the first step, the hardest one, the one I had spent my whole life trying to take. We arrived in Washington, D.C., on a bus with squeaky brakes and windows too fogged to see out of. I had $48 left and a note in my pocket with the name of a woman who owed Judge Daniels a favor. Her name was Ruth, and she ran a modest boarding house in a quiet corner of the city, far from the noise and faces that haunted me. She didn't ask where we came from, just showed me to a small room on the second floor, gave me a key, and told me to get some rest. I started working the next morning, cleaning bathrooms, changing linens, and scrubbing kitchen floors. Ruth paid me cash at the end of every week enough to keep the lights on and buy Charles milk and second-hand clothes. I didn't complain. I couldn't afford to. That house became our world, a place where I could rebuild brick by brick, even if every brick carried the weight of who I used to be. I told people my name was Emma Clark, said I was from Richmond, said my son's father had died in an accident, and we'd come to the city for a fresh start. I had rehearsed the lies so many times that they came out smoothly, polished, but every word tasted like gravel in my mouth. Still, lies were safer than the truth. Truth could be traced. Charles started preschool nearby. I'd walk him there every morning holding his tiny hand, pretending the sidewalk beneath our feet was solid. He thrived in that school, made friends, brought home finger paintings with sons that had smiling faces. Sometimes I'd watch him through the window at pickup, and I'd feel this ache in my chest. Joy and guilt tangled so tightly I couldn't tell them apart, but the fear never really left. It lived in my bones, in the way I locked the doors 3 times before bed, in the way I memorized every license plate that parked on our block. I'd see men with familiar walks, or hear voices that sounded just a little too close to Jack's, and the panic would rise like a tide. I'd hide it from Charles, but it ate at me. I never told anyone what happened. Not Ruth, not the other women at the boarding house. They had their own stories, their own ghosts. We spoke in silence more often than words. We shared coffee, nodded in passing, but no one pried. It was the only way we could stay upright. Some nights I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what Jack would do if he ever found us. I knew he'd never stop seeing Charles as his. That was the nightmare I couldn't shake. I had escaped once, but monsters don't always stay in the woods. Sometimes they remember the scent of your fear. Sometimes they come knocking just when you think the world is safe. But every morning I got up, I made breakfast. I packed Charles's bag. I folded sheets and scrubbed floors like my life depended on it, because in many ways it did. I didn't know how long we had or how far I'd have to keep running, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back. Little by little, I began to feel human again. I laughed at things. I planted flowers in cracked pots outside the back steps. I started reading books before bed, stories that didn't involve fear or shame. Charles grew taller, stronger. His voice changed from baby babble to questions about the stars, and I answered everyone with as much wonder as I could fake. I tried not to think about what I'd lost, about the years that had been stolen, about the girl who once believed home meant safety. I focused on the now. The sound of Charles's laughter echoed through the hallway, the smell of cinnamon from Ruth's kitchen on Sunday mornings, the hum of the city outside our window that for the first time didn't sound like a threat. Freedom, I learned, isn't loud. It's quiet. It's steady. It's choosing to stay when fear tells you to run. It's holding your child's hand and trusting that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow will be kind. Mr. Howard moved into the boarding house the spring Charles turned 6. He was in his late 60s, quiet, and always wore a hat, even indoors. Said it was a habit from his Navy days. At first I didn't pay him much mind. Just another tenant passing through, keeping to himself, nodding politely in the hallway. But he noticed things. The way Charles clung to my side. The tiredness in my eyes that no amount of sleep could fix. One day I was carrying laundry up the stairs with Charles trailing behind. Mr. Howard stepped aside, took the basket without asking, and said nothing more than, "Let the boy be a boy." I didn't realize how much I needed kindness until that moment. He never pried, never asked about my past, but he listened when I offered pieces of it. He'd sit on the porch in the evenings sipping coffee, watching Charles play with a wooden truck he'd carved himself. Sometimes he'd hand Charles small things, a pocket knife handle, a polished stone, and say, "This is for your courage." Charles would light up in a way that made my throat ache. It wasn't sudden the way he became part of our lives. It was slow, gentle, like rain softening hard soil. He started fixing things around the house without being asked. A leaky faucet, a creaky step. One day he built a bookshelf in our room after hearing me complain that I had nowhere to put Charles's growing collection of library books. I found myself looking forward to those porch evenings. We didn't talk about anything big, just shared the quiet. Sometimes he'd tell stories from his Navy days, and I'd catch myself laughing, really laughing for the first time in years. It wasn't romantic. It was something better, safer, like family without the weight of blood. Charles adored him, called him Pops by the end of that summer. Mr. Howard didn't correct him, just smiled and patted his head. When Charles scraped his knee, he ran past me to find Mr. Howard, and I didn't mind, because I knew he was in good hands. One snowy morning, Mr. Howard didn't come downstairs. Ruth knocked, but there was no answer. They found him in bed, his hands folded, eyes closed. Peaceful, like he'd just gone to sleep and decided not to wake up. The grief hit harder than I expected. I cried for days more than I had for my own parents. A week later, Ruth handed me a letter, said it was in Mr. Howard's drawer with my name on it. Inside was a note written in his shaky hand. He said he had no children of his own, no wife. No one left but us. He had left the house for me. Said it was time I stopped renting my place in this world. I read it over and over, tears soaking the ink. For the first time, I felt chosen not out of obligation, but out of love. Not the kind that demands, but the kind that gives. He saw us, really saw us, and he decided we were worth something more. We stayed in that house. I kept running it just the way Ruth had taught me. Charles grew up in the same room under the same roof, and every time I saw that bookshelf or walked past the porch swing Mr. Howard had fixed, I remembered that not all men hurt. Some stay, some give, some heal what others broke. He didn't save me with grand gestures. He saved me with small ones. A nod, a hand on the shoulder, a quiet kind of faith that maybe, just maybe, the past didn't get to decide everything. And that was the kind of love I had almost stopped believing existed, until he showed up quiet and steady and made space for us in a world that had shut every door. Raising Charles was the hardest and most beautiful thing I've ever done. From the moment I held him, I knew every breath I took would be for him. I worked jobs that broke my back, cleaned houses that smelled of bleach and despair, and waited tables where I was invisible. I never complained, because every dollar meant a warm coat, a full lunchbox, a roof that didn't leak. He was a bright boy, curious, always asking questions with those wide brown eyes that could undo me in a second. He'd sit at the table with his elbows on his homework, look up and ask if his dad had freckles too, if he were tall, if he liked the ocean. I would smile and give vague answers, usually about kindness or bravery, things I wish were true. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if the lie would grow too heavy to carry, if someday he'd look at me and see a coward. But I told myself over and over this wasn't a lie. It was a shield, a wall between him and the darkness I had lived through, and I was willing to carry that weight if it meant he walked lighter. He once asked me why I never dated. Why did no man ever come around? I told him I had everything I needed with him. It was true in the only way that mattered. He filled every corner of my life. I didn't have room for anything else. And maybe I didn't believe I deserved it. As he got older, he started to notice the gaps. In the stories I told, in the silence that hung too long, the word father came up. I could feel his questions growing sharper, more precise. But he never pushed. Maybe he sensed the edge in my voice when I changed the subject. Or maybe he saw that I was hiding something too painful to name. Still, I gave him everything I could. Piano lessons when I could barely pay rent. Weekend trips to the park with a second-hand kite. Letters in his lunchbox reminded him how loved he was. I made every birthday cake from scratch. He never had less than what he needed, even if I had nothing left by the end of the day. He grew into the kind of man I had dreamed he could be. Gentle, strong, the kind of man who holds the door, who listens more than he speaks, who volunteers at shelters because he says everyone deserves to be seen. I used to watch him from the window, tall and kind, and wonder how something born from violence could grow into light. There were moments, though, where I caught a flicker in his face, like he was holding back a question, like he was waiting for me to say something I never did. I knew one day he might ask again, not with the innocence of a child, but with the depth of a man who wants to understand his place in the world. I rehearsed answers for that day, but none of them ever felt right. What would I say? That the man who made him never loved, never cared, only took. That his birth came from pain, not love. I couldn't do that to him. I wouldn't. Because I had seen what that kind of truth does. It doesn't just hurt. It corrodes. It lingers. So I chose silence. Not because I didn't respect him, but because I loved him enough to protect the way he saw himself. I let him believe in a story that didn't exist because it gave him the foundation he needed to grow. And sometimes I wonder if that makes me a liar, or just a mother. Now he's a father himself. And when I see him hold his little girl, I feel something crack open in my chest. All that I held back, all that I carried alone, it was for this, for her, for a family built on love, not fear. I'll probably never tell him the truth, not unless he asks with eyes that won't let me lie. And even then, I don't know if I can. Because this lie, as heavy as it is, gave him wings. And I don't regret that. Not for a second. I was born in Oak Ridge, a small town that never really saw me. Not the real me. Just the quiet girl who knew how to keep her head down. I learned early that silence could be a shield, that if I didn't speak, I might survive. And for a while, that was enough. I became a mother at 14, a child raising a child, carrying pain in my bones that no one else could see. I gave everything to protect Charles, my time, my body, my truth. And for decades, I lived with that choice, like it was stitched into my skin. Now I'm 73. I've watched my son become a father. I've held my granddaughter in my arms and felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I understood what it meant to look at a child and feel no fear, only love, pure and untangled. I never thought I'd tell this story, not out loud, not like this. But time does something to you. It softens edges, it makes space. And something in me said, if not now, when? If I keep this locked up any longer, I'll leave this world with the lie still breathing. I'm telling it now because I want you to understand what survival really looks like. It's not clean. It's not triumphant. Sometimes it's just waking up each day and choosing to stay. Choosing to love even when you've never seen love done right. Choosing to protect even when no one protected you. Oak Ridge is far behind me now. That house, that town, that name. I buried them all the day I ran, but they never really left me. They lived in my shadow in the way I double-checked locks, in the way I smiled too quickly when strangers got too close. But today I say goodbye for real. I say it for the girl I used to be, the one who cried herself to sleep, the one who thought no one would believe her, the one who carried shame that never belonged to her. I say it for her. Until never again, Oak Ridge. You don't get to own my voice anymore. If you're watching this and you've been through something you can't name, I want you to know you're not alone. Your story matters, even if no one listened back then, even if it still hurts to breathe when you think about it. You made it, and that is enough. Share this video if it touched something in you. Not for me, for the ones still hiding, for the girl curled up on a mattress right now, thinking she won't make it. Let her hear my voice and know she can. Let her know healing is slow, but it is real. I'm not the hero of this story. I'm just someone who kept going, someone who chose to stay in the world long enough to find a little light. And if you're here listening, then maybe that light can pass through me into you. Maybe you'll carry it forward. Maybe this is how we begin again, together, in the open, where we all belong.